Hello, everybody, and welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Tuesday, the 2nd of January. Yesterday, I was talking to you about resolutions and things like that, and I got thinking about something over Christmas. Between Christmas and New Year, I had a bit of time. I took some downtime and just relaxed and did some reading. And in getting ready to sort of thinking about moving, going through my books and things like that, I found this book, Anna Karenina by Tolstoy. And if you can see, don't think you know if you can see it, but it's Christopher Reeve and Jacqueline Bisset are on the front cover from the movie that was made of this back in like the 80s, I think, 1985. And you see, I bought this book when I was 14 years old. I had this idea that I was going to read Tolstoy. When I got my first part-time job, I worked for Burger King on Clifton Hill in Niagara Falls the summer between grade 9 and 10. And before that, when I was in grade 9, I had a job every Tuesday where I was the dorm monitor. And basically, the YWCA had a volleyball league that had to be in a school, and the school door had to be locked. You couldn't leave it open. So they hired me for $4 an hour to sit at a desk that I moved there to unlock to open the door for people as they came and went for their volleyball league. So I made $16 a night from September till May, once a week. And the thing is, when I get my paycheck, the first thing I would do is I went to Niagara Square. It was a mall in Niagara Falls, and they had a Kohl's bookstore, and I would go in and I would buy a book. Usually big, thick books. Like this book has 807 pages in it, as my husband says, the tiniest little print. It drives him nuts. But I would buy myself a book because I love books. I collect them. I have them everywhere. You can see that. This is only one little corner of this room. My house is filled with books. And when we move, when I move, I'm probably going to have to pare them down. We won't have a bit as much space where we're going, and that's not a bad thing. But so I was looking for something. I thought, I should read this book, and it's a bit of a slog. It's kind of written the way Charles Dickens would write it. Tolstoy wrote it in sequences, like in chapters for publication. So I think he was writing for pay, so it's short chapters. It's interesting. It's taking me a long time. The way I'm looking, because I have so many books on the go, what I decided was going to read at least 5 pages a night of it, and it would take me until the end of May. If I did that. I'm now up to approximately the middle of April that I'll get it done, because I've been reading a little bit more, but I also read other things. But one of the things about resolutions, as I said about hope yesterday, is that they bring us to do something and to look forward to something in new ways. And one of those things, when I realized, is this book. This speaks to me about who I was as a 15-year-old when I bought this book, that I thought I could read Tolstoy at that age, and I probably could have. I just didn't. But I know that had I read this book then, I would not have actually enjoyed it or appreciated it as much as I do now. Because what happened in the intervening years were things like learning world history in high school and university, and becoming to understand what happened in Russia, and understanding the serfs and the revolution and things like this, because of when this book is taking place, and the community that he's talking about, the stratus of the group, the socioeconomic status of the group that he's talking about, where the characters are from, and his references to the other characters. It brings, if I'd read this before I understood all that, it would not have meant as much to me. There were nuances I would miss. And now, being this old woman that I am, having lived and watched and seeing what's happening in Ukraine, it's a whole different way of understanding what Tolstoy was saying and being able to look back on it. And that makes me think about, like with resolutions, again, when we look back on the resolutions that we've made and then we fail at, or even the ones we've managed to keep, when we look back on them, we see new things. There's like strata, like layers and layers and layers of learning are placed upon them. And that's the thing about living. The importance of recognizing that just because even if I'd read this book when I was 15, I hope that if I had read the book when I was 15, I would have kept it. Which is probably why I have so many books, because I never give them away. But that's not because I collect the books, but I hope I would have kept it even if I'd read it back then, because I would have had the force. I would have hoped I would have the foresight to think someday I'll read that book again, not just because it was a good book, but because someday I'll read it again and I will learn more from it. And that's what I'm like with a lot of books. I go back and I read them and I remember reading them, and it's like, oh, I forgot that part, or I never thought of that. Life itself, the growing, the learning, the experiences we have as we mature, as we become adults and older adults, helps us to recognize those things that we missed, that we skipped over. The things that, our life experience at that point made us focus on that versus something else. It's kind of like another book. This one. Now, you can't really see it here with this cover, but it's the Holy Bible. This is the revised standard version, the NRSV View, which is an updated edition of the NRSV, and I really like it. I'm not seeing a whole lot of differences, but there's some nuances. But I've read the Bible. In my earlier years, I read it through from cover to cover. I have read it through using those, through the Bible in 365 days, where they read an Old Testament, a Psalm, a Gospel, and New Testament reading. I've read it beginning with Acts and working my way to Zechariah or to Zephaniah, all kinds of different ways. Probably 4 or 5 times I've read it right through. During the year, the 3 years of the cycle of the church, 3 years that we use the Revised Common Lectionary, we read quite big chunks of it over the 3 years. We don't cover the whole thing, but we do read it. And what amazes me is the new things I recognize when I read it again. As a preacher, it can be hard when you realize you're preaching the same text every 3 years. But it is amazing how many times I go to the text. I sit down during the week to think, okay, I'm going to preach this week in here. I'm going to read the gospel. And I've done this so many times. How am I ever going to come up with something different to preach? What is it? I say a prayer and ask God to allow God's Spirit, the Holy Spirit, to open my eyes that I might truly see the words, to open my ears that I might truly hear God's voice, and to open my heart that I might be open to hearing the word in a new way. And it is amazing how many times those prayers are answered. When I simply go back to an old text and look at it, having lived another couple of years, or through more experiences, or moved or met new people and heard about their experiences, it gives me a completely different way of listening to the word that's being spoken in the text. Whether it's a novel written by a Russian, 150 years ago, or a series of texts written by people over a span of probably thousands of years, who had no idea that Rachel Parker would someday be opening it up on a daily basis to read it. There is so much that we can glean when we look back at things that we think we already know. And so whether that's resolutions in the new year that we look back on and say, hey, what do I remember from that? What have I learned? Or looking at going back to books we may have read before or maybe haven't read before, but reading them and realizing, if I hadn't known X, Y, and Z, then that wouldn't have made sense. Or reading it and saying, oh, now this makes that make more sense. What's happening in life? It's important that we continue to learn, that we be lifelong learners. And it's really important that we allow ourselves be open to recognizing that we didn't know it all before. And that when we go back and relearn the lessons we've already learned, we may learn that not only was there a lesson to begin with, but there are several more since then that are powerful and life-changing for us. Be a lifelong learner. It's a cool thing to do. Have a great day. God bless you. And I'll see you again tomorrow for Church at Home with Rachel.